Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I wanted to talk to you guys about my breastfeeding experience just because, I am a first-time mom and I know that there are a lot of moms out there that are watching my videos, and as well as people that are pregnant or planning to have children. I'm sorry if this video is not, something that you're interested in, but it's always good to hear somebody's opinion or knowledge in regards to a certain subject if you're planning to go towards that in the future. So even if you're not married or not planning to have children for a while, this is still good, knowledgeable stuff. So without further ado, I am going to talk about my breastfeeding experience. So I wanted to start off by saying that before I had my baby, I was always, definitely in this natural mode. I wanted to make sure that everything was happening in the most natural way possible, which is kind of a wish for every mother, I would think. Just because you don't want a bunch of intervention, you don't know the risks that, it takes with all the intervention that happens. But if you don't care, or, if it doesn't bother you, then definitely there's no judgment on my behalf. I personally wanted everything to happen as naturally as possible, which I did give, birth naturally. However, in regards to breastfeeding, I've always, saw women that talked about it that were mothers, and they were saying how hard it was and how frustrating it can be. And I was like most of the people that have never experienced it themselves were saying, what's the big deal? What is the big deal with breastfeeding? Like, people act like it's just such a hard job, and it absolutely is. I think once you experience it, maybe even a person explaining it doesn't really do it justice until you really experience it yourself. Number one, you're basically a kitchen that never closes, especially at the beginning stages of your infant's birth. From birth to about, I'd say, 1 to 2 months, it can be super frustrating because you're learning your baby. Your baby is learning to latch and feed. Your breasts might be sensitive, for a while, and you might experience a lot of, breakage in your nipple and stuff like that. I'm not trying to be graphic or anything like that, but it's a little infant that has to feed, 10 to 12 times per 24-hour period. And it's a constant like sucking motion. And it's not like, a gentle little cat lick. We're talking about, a little human being who is hungry and who wants to get all the milk out that he or she can get. So it can be very hard and very, very painful. And I know I've heard a lot of people say, if you're breastfeeding correctly, it shouldn't be painful. But honestly, that's not true. I've learned that it's really genetically passed down to you. So a lot of the experience that your mother has experienced, you're more than likely are going to experience it. My mom had some issues with breastfeeding, but she didn't have none of this technology to work with. She had to self-express in the bottle to give herself some break in between feeding so that her nipple could heal. And she even told me a story which, it's funny, but at the same time it's almost, made me cry because I've been there, and so I know what it feels like when it comes to, pumping and spilling milk. It's not something just like you turn on the faucet and it goes. It takes time. And it doesn't matter if you're breastfeeding, or if you're bottle feeding, with your breast milk. Because I have to be on the pump, pretty much all day. Now it's better because she doesn't feed as often, but she does eat more. So that's the big difference, is even though she's not getting that many feedings in throughout the day, she requires more of it. So sometimes I have to sit on the pump a lot longer. And number one, I think the challenge is for first-time moms is that your milk is first coming in. I think that's the hardest thing, is your body's trying to figure out how to deliver this baby, and then all these hormonal changes that you've never experienced before, even though every pregnancy is different. I think second time around is probably a little bit easier. If if your milk came in, you probably didn't have as much of a challenge. When you're a first-time mom, you've never breastfed before, it can be a challenge because you're waiting for your breast milk to come in, and it can be kind of a challenge. And then like mine came in the next day after giving birth, and my boobs were like engorged. Like I had to sit on the pump the whole day. And the reason I started pumping was because my baby was born with higher levels of jaundice, which is pretty normal for babies. However, they were trying to keep it down, and usually within a certain span of days, it can peak, which is normal as well. However, when it peaks a certain level, you know, above, then it can be very dangerous for the baby because it can cause brain damage. So in a sense, that really makes the baby very sleepy, and the baby doesn't latch on very well, which that's kind of the things that she was doing. She was very sleepy and she didn't latch on very well. So I kind of felt nervous because I'm not a big fan of staying at the hospital, and I'm sure a lot of people are not as well. But they were telling me that if the levels get too high, then she'd have to be admitted to the hospital so that she can be monitored and be put on the lamp. And I definitely didn't want that. You know, I wanted to breastfeed. However, I was trying to avoid a major problem, and I didn't want us to be admitted because it would have not been good. I'm a first-time mom, you know, I'm trying to get acclimated to my baby, and now this thing, and I have to be at the hospital. And if you've ever been at the hospital, you know that they come in like every hour, every two, you know, to check vitals, give medication, to check on the patient, and it can be very, very frustrating. So you can't get enough rest, you know, even with the infant not really sleeping much because they want to eat. And then on top of that, you got people coming in and out. And another thing is I didn't want to be admitted because you're more than likely to contract some kind of, you know, infection. You know, despite the hospital, you know, being clean and all that stuff and people washing hands, the reason they don't keep a patient more than 3 days usually is because there's a higher chance of you contracting some kind of infection or some kind of a, you know, not disease, but like some kind of a sickness, just because there's so many sick people around and you got nurses going in and out, and just because they wash their hands doesn't mean, you know, that bug or whatever doesn't get passed around, and it definitely does. So I was trying to avoid that. That's why I started pumping. And I know that within a first week, there's a very crucial time where you can give baby a bottle. However, if they learn in their senses that plastic nipple is my source of food, then they're gonna really quickly reject your nipple. So I've tried to kind of work both ways. And another thing that I had as a challenge, which it was kind of my mom's problem as well when she, you know, was breastfeeding, was one of the nipples was inverted. And so breastfeeding or breast pump as well can kind of pull it out a little bit. However, it does take time. So my challenge was, you know, I couldn't just feed my baby off of one and pump the other one and just put it in the refrigerator, because one of them will be really, really, really damaged and cracked. Because, I mean, can you imagine a baby eating off of your boob for like 10 to 12 times, and sometimes they can eat even more. And that's sitting there for like good 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes. And so I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to be even more emotional than I was. You know, it's just such an emotional experience. It's exhausting, and then you come home and it's a whole new ball game for you to learn. And then, you know, your baby's trying to figure out what, you know, what their food source is. So I did started bottle feeding her, and she kind of, you know, learned that that's her food source. And, you know, I was disappointed. I was disappointed that I couldn't really breastfeed. I didn't think it was going to be that challenging, but it is very, very challenging. So despite all that, you know, I've read some articles and I've seen some girls post about it, that a mother was kind of concerned because her baby was on the boob for like, you know, really extensive period of time, which is not a good sign. And he was still fussy. And so she kept reiterating to the nursing staff and the doctors that, you know, there's something wrong. And they were like, no, it's normal. Infants usually cry, you know, just because they're just out of the womb and they're trying to get acclimated and stuff, which is definitely a big shock for an infant. However, you know, she had an instinct that there was something wrong. And so the baby, I think, went a couple of days and he would just cry, wake up, be on the boob for a long time, and then cry himself to sleep basically. And he had to be admitted to the ICU, and a few days later he died because he was technically starving. So I think that made me grateful for the fact that, you know, even though my experience was not the ideal experience that I wanted to have, I was glad that my baby was getting the food that she needed. Because I needed to make sure that she was getting pumped of fluids, because as soon as you start breastfeeding, you know, with the milk, that gives her antigens, and that also helps her to eliminate that extra bilirubin, which is the cause of the higher levels of jaundice. So that's why I wanted to make sure that my milk was coming in, that she was getting fed enough fluids, and then she had, you know, multiple diaper changes. And that's another sign that you can see, is if your baby is eating enough, is pooping and peeing. You know, with breastfeeding, you don't know how many ounces your baby ate. So that can be a challenge, you know, when they're frustrated that maybe they don't have a good latch, or maybe your milk production is not that well. Some foods affect, you know, your milk production. Like, there are things throughout the month that you start learning and picking up that can really cause to add to the frustration of, you know, the whole breastfeeding experience. I mean, some people have it great, and that's great. You know, some people like, I didn't have any problems, my milk came in, my baby wasn't fussy, they were getting enough food. However, that's not the case, as I'm learning, for everyone. You know, and I'm not trying to get into the formula portion of it, because, you know, I've learned that there are things and reasons why moms have to put baby on formula, and I'm glad that that's an option for some moms, if there was a challenge that they, you know, were faced with, or they're not able to breastfeed, and that's fine. I don't think we should be judgmental about it. And so I think my experience really helped me see just different scenarios of people's experience. You know, there's people that have really great experience, there's people that have major challenges, and that's what makes breastfeeding really, really hard, is just like a myriad of things that pile on top of each other, and it can be very, 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 very frustrating. Like, I didn't know that you know, during your monthly cycle, once it starts coming in and you kind of start normalizing, that I think when you release an egg throughout the month, and also when your period comes, that your milk production can be significantly reduced. And I can see that. And, you know, knowing those things can really help you not be frustrated, but try to, you know, either do some kind of shakes that you can drink that help promote that milk supply, or maybe you have to be on the pump more often, or maybe your baby will feed more often on the boob, and that's some of the things that will kind of help to eliminate the frustration when you kind of start learning your own body and knowing what's happening. There's also certain foods that your baby might, you know, react to, be gassy or allergic to. There's also, you know, certain foods that might reduce your milk production, like garlic. I know that garlic really kills milk production. I know I've heard somebody say that it actually helps to stimulate it, but anything spicy, I remember my mom has always told me, she said anything spicy, garlic and stuff like that can really reduce your milk supply. She always said it kind of kills it. So definitely be on the lookout for that, and that's kind of, you know, what I've experienced with my breastfeeding. And this is, I'm going on 5th month of breastfeeding, and actually told somebody that we should have a celebratory day for breastfeeding awareness, because it is definitely a hard job. You know, I don't even know how mothers that have to go to work do it. I know they pump, and it's required by law for your employer to give you time to pump throughout the day, which is great. I mean, it's really, really good. You know, but everybody's experience come with certain challenges, and if you're one of the lucky people that don't have any challenge with breastfeeding, kudos to you. That's phenomenal. You'll have that bond with your baby. Plus, you know, breastfeeding on the boob actually helps to stimulate your milk production. So it's definitely a good thing if you're trying to strive to, you know, do it as naturally as possible. However, there are other tools that are available to you, and just know that, you know, you can't be stubborn. The most important thing is that your child is fed and that there's no problems and issues with that. I mean, nothing is better than knowing that your child is fed. So don't be too hard on yourself and don't be too frustrated. There's also, you know, lactational consultants that you can contact and talk to. There's different forums that you can talk to on that have different questions that can, you know, answer some of your, that can answer or give answers to some of your questions. So, you know, don't be frustrated, because it's definitely a learning experience, especially if you're a first-time mom. It's definitely an experience. It's definitely another job. So just, you know, make sure that you don't stress out. That's another thing that can reduce milk. And I know that's hard to say when you just gave birth to like a 7-8 pound baby and your body is recovering from all this trauma, because basically it is. You might be emotional, and so I remember Ryan was really encouraging me. You know, sometimes we were up pretty much the whole night trying to figure out what's going on, and I would just sit there and cry. And you know, it might kind of sound funny right now, but that, you know, a couple of months ago it was not funny. It was very frustrating, and I think as a mother you want to give best to your child, and I think that's what that was that kind of added to the frustration, that you didn't know what was going on and you couldn't help your child. So or you could, or you know, your baby was just crying and you just were kind of emotional because you didn't know if there was something else that you could have done, or there's something wrong that you're doing. So that's why I think breastfeeding can be so challenging, because there's so many aspects to it. But you know, don't be hard on yourself. As long as your child is fed, no matter what you're, you know, giving your child. Of course, breast milk is definitely the best, because you are giving your baby the antigens it needs, and the way breast milk is just incredible in it, you know, in general, because as your baby grows, your milk changes to accommodate your baby and help it grow throughout its process. And not to say that formula doesn't do the same thing, but it's definitely, you know, kind of more of a synthetic version. So if you can breastfeed your baby, it's definitely a good thing, even if you have to pump. But if not, then, you know that, you know, there's no judgment on my behalf. As long as your baby is fed and, you know, is not starving, that's always a good thing. So I hope this was helpful for some of you guys. I know this was kind of a chattery video, but I just know that a lot of you have a lot of questions in regards to that. And if you have any other questions that I haven't covered, if I don't know the answer, I'll definitely look it up or direct you to somebody that knows it. But as always, create culture and be you, and I will see you guys next time in my next video. Bye-bye.